Dr. He-Jin Kim sat at her desk in the Seoul Interplanetary Research Institute, staring at her computer screen. The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m., but she couldn't leave. Not now. Not when she was looking at something that could change everything scientists knew about Venus. This can't be right, she said to herself, adjusting her glasses. The data from the latest Venus probe showed something unusual in the rock samples. There were tiny marks that looked just like the ones bacteria leave behind on Earth. The office was quiet and dark. Most people had gone home hours ago, but down the hall, she could see one light still on. Dr. Taiwan Park was there, as usual. He was the only other person who stayed this late. He-Jin picked up her tablet and walked to his office. "Taiwan, I need you to look at something," she said, standing in his doorway. "I think I found something important." Taiwan looked up from his own work. He was younger than He-Jin, but he was one of the best research partners she had ever worked with. "What did you find?" he asked, making space on his desk for her tablet. He-Jin placed the tablet in front of him. "Look at these marks in the rock samples from Venus. They're just like the bacterial fossils we find in Earth's oldest rocks." Her hand shook slightly as she zoomed in on the image. Taiwan's eyes widened. He looked at the image, then at He-Jin, then back at the image. "When did you find this?" he asked, his voice quiet but excited. "Just now. And there's more." He-Jin pulled up another screen. "I found old climate data from Venus's deep surface layers. The numbers suggest that Venus was once much cooler. It might have been like Earth." They spent the next 3 hours checking and double-checking the data. They ran tests, compared samples, and looked at old research papers. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Venus had once been a planet where life could exist. At 2:30 a.m., they finally sat back in their chairs. The evidence was clear. "We need to tell Dr. Song," Taiwan said, referring to their research director. "This changes everything we thought we knew about Venus." He-Jin nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead. If Venus had once been like Earth, what had changed it? And more importantly, could the same thing happen to Earth? The next morning, they presented their findings to Dr. Song. The old director listened carefully, asking sharp questions about their methods and data. When they finished, he was silent for a long moment. "This is remarkable work," he said finally. "But we need to be absolutely sure before we announce anything. I want you both to spend the next week confirming these findings. Check everything 3 times. If this is real, it will change how we think about both Venus and Earth." Over the next week, He-Jin and Taiwan barely left the lab. They tested samples, analyzed data, and wrote detailed reports. Other scientists came to help, but He-Jin and Taiwan led the work. They found more evidence, chemical signatures that suggested ancient water, mineral patterns that could only form in cooler temperatures. Finally, after 7 days of intense work, they were ready. Dr. Song called a meeting with the Institute's board. He-Jin stood at the front of the room, her heart beating fast, but her voice steady. "We have found evidence that Venus was once very different from what it is today," she began. "Our data suggests it was a planet that could have supported life, much like Earth. This discovery raises important questions about planetary change and what it means for Earth's future." As she spoke, He-Jin could see the impact of her words on the faces around her. She knew this was just the beginning. Their discovery would lead to new research, new questions, and perhaps new warnings about Earth's own future. The room erupted in discussion when she finished. Scientists talked excitedly about next steps and implications, but He-Jin caught Taiwan's eye across the room. They both knew their real work was just beginning. Understanding what happened to Venus might be the key to protecting Earth's future. 2 months after He-Jin and Taiwan's discovery, the International Space Coalition called an emergency meeting in Geneva. Leaders from space agencies around the world gathered to discuss what they all knew was necessary: a mission to Venus. Commander Jai-Ho Lee stood at the window of the conference room, looking out at the Swiss mountains. At 45 years old, he had led 3 missions to Mars. But Venus was different. Venus was a planet that could kill a person in seconds. Commander Lee called out Director Wilson from NASA. "Please join us at the table. We need your input on the mission structure." Jai-ho turned and walked to his seat. Around the table sat the best minds in space exploration. They had spent the morning reviewing He-jin's research and its implications. "We need a small but highly skilled team," Jai-ho said, looking at the mission plans in front of him. "Venus won't give us much time. Every person must be the absolute best at what they do." Dr. Sun-Le Choi was the first person they chose. She was the top atmospheric specialist in South Korea, known for her work on extreme weather conditions. When they called her, she was already packing her bags. "I've studied Venus's atmosphere for 10 years, Sun-Le told them during her interview. "I always knew there was more to learn there. Now we have proof." The next choice was Dr. Min-Ki Kang, a geologist who had developed new ways to study rocks in extreme heat. He had worked with Jai-ho before, on Mars. "The rocks will tell us everything," Min-Ki said when he joined the team. "They hold the story of Venus's past. We just need to learn how to read them." The team spent 3 months training in the world's most advanced space center. They learned to use new heat-resistant suits that could withstand Venus's terrible temperatures. They practiced working in conditions that copied Venus's crushing pressure. One day, during training, Sun-Le made an observation that changed their approach. "We're thinking about this wrong," she said during a team meeting. "We're treating Venus like it's just a hot planet, but it's really Earth's twin gone wrong. We need to look for signs of what it used to be, not just what it is now." Jai-ho liked how Sun-Le thought. She didn't just see Venus as a deadly planet. She saw it as a place that held secrets about Earth's possible future. The biggest challenge was building the landing craft. Venus's surface was hot enough to melt lead. Regular spacecraft wouldn't last 5 minutes. The engineering team worked day and night to create something new. "It's like building a submarine that can survive in lava," one engineer explained to Jai-ho. "But we're doing it. The shield will give you 3 days on the surface." 3 days wasn't much time, but it was more than anyone had ever had on Venus before. He-jin and Tae-won joined the mission team as science advisors. They would stay on Earth but would guide the exploration based on their research. "Look for these specific mineral patterns," He-jin told them during a briefing. She showed them pictures of the marks they had found. "They might be everywhere once you know what to look for." As launch day got closer, the team worked harder. They studied every detail about Venus. They practiced their emergency procedures until they could do them in their sleep. They learned to trust each other completely. The night before launch, Jai-ho found Sun-Le in the simulation room, running one last practice. "Worried?" he asked. Sun-Le shook her head. "Excited. We're about to solve one of the biggest mysteries in our solar system. We might learn how to save Earth by understanding what happened to Venus." Jai-ho nodded. He felt the same way. Tomorrow, they would start their journey to humanity's first real exploration of Venus's surface. They would try to unlock the secret of how a planet that might have been like Earth had turned into one of the most dangerous places in the solar system. As he looked at their spacecraft one last time that night, Jai-ho thought about what they might find. Whatever it was, he knew it would change how humans thought about their own planet's future. While the Venus team prepared for their mission, Do Hyun-yoon led an important research project on Earth. His team worked in a large laboratory in Seoul, studying how Earth's atmosphere was changing. The work was urgent because they had found some worrying signs. Do-hyun sat at his desk early one morning, looking at new data from air testing stations around the world. The numbers on his screen made him frown. He picked up his phone and called Yoon-ji Baek, his best climate researcher. "Yoon-ji, can you come to my office? There's something in these numbers you need to see," he said. Yoon-ji arrived 5 minutes later. She had been studying climate patterns for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like what Do-hyun showed her. The carbon dioxide levels are rising faster than our models predicted, Do-hyun explained, pointing to a graph on his screen. And look at these temperature readings from the Arctic. Eun-jae looked closely at the data. This is not good, she said quietly. These patterns, they look like the early stages of what He-jin found in the Venus data. They called Jae-young Nam, their atmospheric chemist, to join them. Jae-young had been testing air samples from different heights in the atmosphere. His latest results added to their concerns. The upper atmosphere is changing, Jae-young told them, spreading his reports on Do-hyun's desk. We're seeing new chemical reactions that shouldn't be happening. It's like the air itself is starting to behave differently. The three scientists spent the whole morning comparing their findings with He-jin's Venus research. The similarities were clear and frightening. Earth's atmosphere was showing early signs of the same changes that had happened on Venus long ago. Do-hyun knew they had to act quickly. He called an emergency meeting with government officials for the next day. That evening, he prepared his presentation carefully, making sure to explain everything in simple terms. The meeting room was full the next morning. Government leaders and scientific advisors sat around a large table, waiting to hear what Do-hyun's team had found. Earth's atmosphere is changing in dangerous ways, Do-hyun began. He showed them the graphs and data. We are seeing patterns that match what happened on Venus before it became too hot for life. The room was silent as he explained. Then the questions started. How long do we have? Asked one official. Can we stop it? Asked another. Eun-jae stepped forward to answer. We don't know exactly how long we have, she said, but we know what's causing it. Our factories, our cars, our power plants. They're all putting too many gases into the air. Jae-young added his findings about the atmospheric changes. He explained how the upper air was trapping more heat, just like Venus's thick atmosphere did. Some officials looked worried. Others looked doubtful. One of them, Mr. Park, spoke up. These changes could take hundreds of years. Why should we worry now? Do-hyun was ready for this question. Because Venus shows us what happens if we wait too long, he said. Once the process reaches a certain point, we won't be able to stop it. Venus passed that point. We still have a chance to prevent it on Earth. The meeting lasted for hours. By the end, even the doubters were concerned. The evidence was too clear to ignore. That evening, Do-hyun's team sent their findings to research centers around the world. They also sent them to the Venus mission team. Understanding Earth's changes would help the mission know what to look for on Venus. As Do-hyun left the laboratory that night, he looked up at the sky. Venus was visible, shining brightly. It looked peaceful from Earth. But he knew better. It was a warning of what could happen to Earth if they didn't act soon. The spacecraft approached Venus after a 4-month journey through space. Commander Jae-ho Lee looked at the planet through the main window. Venus's thick clouds glowed yellow-white, hiding the deadly surface below. Final system check, Jae-ho announced to his team. We have 3 days once we land. We cannot waste a single minute. Dr. Sun Mi-choi worked at her station, checking the atmospheric readings. Dr. Min-ki Kang prepared the drilling equipment they would need on the surface. Everything had to work perfectly. On Venus, there would be no second chances. All systems are ready, Sun Mi reported. The thermal shields are at full power. We can begin our descent. Jae-ho took a deep breath and gave the command to enter Venus's atmosphere. The spacecraft shook as it pushed through the thick clouds. Warning lights flashed as the outside temperature rose rapidly. Hull temperature rising, Min-ki called out. Shield systems are holding steady. Through the clouds, they caught their first glimpse of Venus's surface. It was a landscape of dark rocks and endless plains, all baking under crushing pressure and heat. Landing site identified, Sun Mi said. It matches the coordinates from He-jin's research. This is where we might find evidence of ancient water. The landing was rough. Venus's thick atmosphere made it difficult to control their descent. When they finally touched down, everyone was silent for a moment, hardly believing they had made it. "We're the first humans to land safely on Venus," Jaiho said quietly. "Now our real work begins." They put on their special protective suits. These suits were engineering masterpieces, designed to withstand Venus's extreme conditions. Even so, they could only work outside for 4 hours at a time. Sun Mai went out first. She carried equipment to test the atmosphere. The scene outside was like nothing they had ever seen. The sky was orange-red, and the ground was hot enough to melt metal. "The pressure here is incredible," Sun Mai reported back. "It's like being a kilometer deep in Earth's ocean, but hot enough to melt lead." Min-Ki joined her with the drilling equipment. They had to work quickly to collect their samples. Every minute outside put enormous strain on their equipment and suits. "Look at this rock formation," Min-Ki called out suddenly. "These patterns, they're exactly what He Jin predicted we'd find. These rocks were shaped by water, not heat." Sun Mi moved closer to look. The rocks showed clear signs of water erosion, preserved beneath layers of newer volcanic rock. It was proof that Venus had once had liquid water on its surface. But they found something even more surprising. In a deep crack in the rocks, Sun Mi's instruments detected traces of complex organic compounds. "This is incredible," she said, her voice shaking with excitement. "These compounds, they could only have formed in much cooler conditions. They're similar to what we find in Earth's oldest rocks, where we know there was once life." They worked continuously for the next 2 days, collecting samples and data. Each new discovery supported what He Jin had theorized. Venus had once been much more like Earth. On their final day, as they prepared to leave, Jaiho took one last look at the harsh landscape. The surface of Venus told a clear story. This planet had changed from a potentially life-supporting world into a place where nothing could survive. "We have what we came for," Jaiho told his team as they sealed the airlock for the last time. "Let's take this evidence back to Earth. People need to understand what we found here." As their spacecraft lifted off from Venus's surface, they carried with them more than just rocks and data. They carried a warning about how drastically a planet's climate could change, and what that might mean for Earth's future. Do-Hyun Yoon stared at his computer screen in the Seoul laboratory. The new data from weather stations around the world showed something that made his hands shake. Earth's atmosphere was changing faster than anyone had expected. He immediately called Young Ji-Bike and Jae-Young Nam to his office. When they arrived, he pointed to the graphs on his screen. "The carbon dioxide levels are rising twice as fast as last year," he explained. "And look at these temperature readings from the Arctic and Antarctic. Both poles are heating up much faster than our models predicted." Eun-Jae leaned closer to the screen. "These patterns match what He Jin found in the Venus data," she said quietly. "The same things happened there before the planet became too hot." Jae-Young pulled out his own reports. His latest tests of the upper atmosphere showed new chemical reactions that worried him. "The air is changing in ways we've never seen before," he said. "Some of our factories are producing gases that act just like the ones that made Venus so hot." They knew they had to tell someone who could help make changes. Young Ho Shin, their political liaison, was the person who could talk to world leaders. They called him right away. Young Ho arrived at the laboratory an hour later. He listened carefully as the scientists explained what they had found. His job was to help government leaders understand complex scientific problems. "Show me everything," Young Ho said. "I need to understand this completely if I'm going to convince people to make changes." The scientists spent hours explaining their findings. They showed him how Earth's atmosphere was starting to trap more heat, just like Venus's did. They explained how certain factories and power plants were making the problem worse. Young Ho took careful notes. He knew this would be a hard message to deliver. Many business leaders wouldn't want to change how their factories worked. Many countries wouldn't want to spend money on new, cleaner ways to make power. "We need to make them understand that this isn't just about saving money," Du-Hyun said. "It's about saving Earth from becoming like Venus." Young Ho nodded. "The Venus mission team will be back soon," he said. "Their evidence will help prove what you're saying. But we shouldn't wait for them. We need to start making changes now. The next few weeks were very busy. Young Ho arranged meetings with government leaders and business owners. The scientists showed them their findings and explained what might happen if Earth's atmosphere kept changing. Some people listened carefully and wanted to help. Others didn't believe there was really a problem. A few got angry and said making changes would cost too much money. But then something happened that made everyone pay attention. The weather started changing in strange ways. Storms became stronger. Some places got much hotter than normal, while others had unusual cold spells. The scientists knew these changes were connected to what they had found in their research. One evening, after another long day of meetings, Do-hyun and his team stood on the roof of their laboratory. They could see the lights of Seoul's factories in the distance. Above them, Venus shined in the evening sky. "We can still fix this," Yoon-ji said, looking at the city below. "We haven't gone past the point of no return like Venus did, but we need to act now." Do-hyun agreed. Earth was showing clear warning signs, just like Venus must have shown long ago. But unlike Venus, Earth still had people who could understand these warnings and do something about them. The question was, would they act in time? The return journey from Venus provided Commander Jae-ho Lee and his team with crucial time to analyze their samples. The spacecraft's laboratory, though small, contained advanced equipment that allowed them to begin their research immediately. Their findings proved more alarming than they had anticipated. Dr. Sun Ma-choi worked diligently at her station, examining the atmospheric data they had collected from Venus's surface. The chemical signatures showed a clear progression of how the planet had transformed from a potentially habitable world into its current state. Each measurement told part of a story that was becoming increasingly relevant to Earth's situation. "Commander," Sun Ma called out one morning during their journey, "I believe I've identified the tipping point in Venus's atmospheric change. The data shows a cascading effect that began with a specific concentration of greenhouse gases." Meanwhile, back on Earth, Dr. Hae-jin Kim and Dr. Ta-won Park received preliminary data transmissions from the Venus mission. They worked continuously in their laboratory at the Seoul Interplanetary Research Institute, comparing the new information with their existing models of Earth's atmospheric changes. Hae-jin examined the latest readings from Earth's atmosphere, comparing them with the Venus data. Her hands trembled slightly as she made the calculations. "Ta-won," she said, her voice steady despite her concern. "Earth's current atmospheric changes are following a pattern remarkably similar to early Venus. We may have less time than we thought." Ta-won moved to her workstation, reviewing the numbers himself. The correlation between Venus's past and Earth's present was undeniable. They immediately contacted Do-hyun's team to share their findings. In the Seoul Environmental Research Center, Do-hyun and his team received Ho-jin's message with growing concern. The evidence from Venus confirmed their worst fears about Earth's changing climate. They began working on a comprehensive report that would clearly explain the situation to world leaders. "The parallels are exact," Do-hyun explained to his team as they compiled their findings. "Venus's transformation began with industrial-type emissions, just like we're producing now. The difference is that we can still stop this process." Im-ji Baek, their climate modeler, created new simulations incorporating the Venus data. The models showed that Earth was approaching a critical threshold. Beyond this point, the atmosphere would begin changing too rapidly to control. "We need to reduce emissions by 60% within 5 years, Im-ji announced after running multiple scenarios. "If we wait longer, the process may become irreversible." As the Venus mission team approached Earth, they prepared their final report. The evidence they carried would prove vital in understanding the full scope of the danger. Their samples and data would show exactly how a planet could transform from habitable to hostile. Commander Jae-ho organized their findings into a clear presentation. "We must help them understand," he told his team. "Venus is not just another planet. It's a preview of Earth's possible future." Dr. Min Ki Kang, examining their rock samples one final time, discovered something significant. The geological records showed that Venus's transformation had accelerated suddenly after reaching a certain temperature threshold. This information could help predict when Earth might reach a similar point of no return. The spacecraft was now only days away from Earth. Hejin and Taiwan prepared for their arrival, organizing an international conference to share the combined findings of both teams. Scientists and leaders from around the world would attend, knowing that the future of Earth might depend on what they learned. Hejin looked out her office window at the evening sky. Venus shone brightly, no longer just an object of scientific curiosity, but a stark warning of what could happen if humanity failed to act. The race to save Earth's climate had begun, and they were already behind. The United Nations General Assembly Hall in New York was filled to capacity. Representatives from every nation had gathered to hear the combined findings of the Venus mission team and Earth's research scientists. The atmosphere in the room was tense with anticipation. Young Ho Shin stood at the podium, preparing to present the evidence that could change how the world approached climate change. Behind him sat Commander Jae-ho Lee and his team, recently returned from Venus, along with Dr. Hejin Kim and the Earth Research Group. Distinguished leaders, Young Ho began, his voice clear and steady. What we present today will show that Earth faces a choice. We can continue on our current path and risk becoming like Venus, or we can act now to protect our planet's future. The presentation began with Hejin showing the original evidence that had led to the Venus mission. She explained how they had discovered signs of Venus's past habitability. Then Commander Jae-ho stepped forward to share what they had found on the planet's surface. "We discovered proof that Venus once had oceans," Jae-ho said, displaying images of the rock formations they had found. The planet was not always the hostile world we see today. It changed, gradually at first, then with increasing speed. Dr. Sun-Lai Choi presented the atmospheric data next. She showed how Venus's atmosphere had transformed, trapping more and more heat until the planet's surface became hot enough to melt lead. Then she displayed graphs showing similar changes beginning in Earth's atmosphere. The room grew quiet as the similarities became clear. Some leaders looked worried. Others appeared skeptical, but none could deny the evidence before them. Do Hyun-yoon presented the Earth research team's findings. He explained how their planet was showing early signs of the same changes that had happened on Venus. However, his message carried hope. "Unlike Venus, we have discovered these changes in time," Do-hyun said. "We can still prevent Earth from following the same path, but we must act quickly and work together." The scientists had prepared a detailed plan. It would require all nations to reduce their industrial emissions dramatically. They would need to change how they produced energy, how they manufactured goods, and how they transported people and products. Many leaders raised concerns about the cost of such changes, but Dr. Min Ki-kang had an answer ready. He showed them evidence from Venus suggesting that an ancient civilization might have tried too late to stop their planet's transformation. "The cost of action today is far less than the cost of waiting," Min Ki explained. "Venus shows us what happens if we delay too long." The debate lasted for hours. Some nations immediately pledged to make changes. Others needed more convincing. Young Ho moved between different groups, explaining the science in ways each could understand. Finally, late in the evening, something unprecedented happened. The world's largest nations agreed to work together. They would share new clean technologies. They would help smaller countries make changes. They would put the planet's future ahead of short-term profits. As the meeting ended, Ho Jin stood with her colleagues near a window. Outside, the sky was growing dark, and Venus was becoming visible. "We did it," she said quietly. "We got them to listen." "Now the real work begins," Commander Jae-ho replied. "We have the world's attention. We need to make sure these changes happen quickly enough to matter." The scientists knew that getting agreement was just the first step. They would need to work hard to help implement the changes they had proposed. But for the first time, they had real hope that Earth would not share Venus's fate. 5 years had passed since the world's leaders had agreed to take action to protect Earth's climate. Dr. Hye-jin Kim stood at her laboratory window, reviewing the latest atmospheric readings. The numbers showed something remarkable. Earth's atmospheric changes were beginning to slow down. Do Hyun-yoon entered her office, carrying new reports from monitoring stations around the world. The global temperature increase has slowed by 40%, he said, placing the documents on her desk. The new environmental measures are working better than we expected. The changes hadn't been easy. Every country had needed to transform how it produced energy and manufactured goods. But the memory of what they had discovered on Venus had convinced people to persist, even when the changes were difficult. Eun Ji-buk, now the head of the Global Climate Monitoring Center, had developed new ways to track Earth's atmospheric health. Her monitoring system could detect even small changes in the air's composition, giving early warnings if anything started to go wrong. We're seeing improvements in air quality across all major cities, Eun-ji reported during their monthly review meeting. The new clean energy systems are working exactly as we hoped. Commander Jae-ho Lee, who had led the Venus mission, now directed the International Space Agency's Planetary Protection Program. His team used satellites to monitor Earth's atmosphere from space, watching for any signs of the changes they had seen on Venus. The satellite data confirms what our ground stations are showing, Jae-ho announced during a video call. Earth's atmosphere is stabilizing. We're moving away from the dangerous path we were on. The transformation was visible in cities around the world. The old factories with their smoking chimneys had been replaced by clean manufacturing centers powered by solar and wind energy. Electric vehicles had replaced most cars that burned gasoline. New forests had been planted to help clean the air. Dr. Sun Mei-choi continued to study Venus, using the lessons from Earth's successful changes to better understand what had happened on the other planet. Her research helped scientists understand how to protect Earth's atmosphere even better. Venus remains our warning, Sun Mai explained during a public lecture. But Earth is now showing us how a planet's people can work together to protect their world. Young Ho-shin, who had helped convince world leaders to make changes, now worked with new governments to maintain the environmental protection programs. The cost of these changes was high, he often said, but the cost of doing nothing would have been much higher. Dr. Min-ki Kang led a team that studied how Earth's rocks were recording the changes in the atmosphere. Future scientists would be able to see in these rocks how close Earth had come to following Venus's path, and how humanity had changed direction in time. One evening, Hye-jin gathered with her original research team to celebrate the 5th anniversary of the Global Environmental Protection Agreement. They stood on the roof of their research center, looking at the stars. "Look at Venus," Taiwan said, pointing to the bright planet in the evening sky. "It's still beautiful, even knowing what we know about it." "It's more than beautiful now," Hye-jin replied. "It's a reminder of what we almost became, and what we chose to become instead." The scientists knew their work wasn't finished. They would need to keep monitoring Earth's atmosphere and improving their protection methods. But they had proven that a planet's people could understand the warnings from their environment and change their path before it was too late. As night fell over Seoul, the city's lights came on, powered by clean energy. Above, Venus shone in the dark sky, no longer a threat but a constant reminder of why they must continue to protect their planet's future.